So with that, we'll get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We're really excited about this webinar. And just a little bit about Ecosystem Marketplace before we get started. EM has been tracking environmental markets for 20 years now. We engage predominantly the supply side of the market actors to collect their over-the-counter transaction data. We analyze that data alongside publicly available registry data to produce reports, like our flagship State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report, which many of you may be familiar with, as well as other webinars and products. We've been, in this space for 20 years now, and our mission is really to address information gaps and drive transparency in carbon markets. So I think this is a great opportunity to do that as well. We're really excited about this webinar. In our most recent State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report that we published in late May of this year, our audience had a lot of interest and questions about ICVCM's Core Carbon Principles program, the state of it, and early developments as we're in this really initial and early phase of implementation of the program. And this is especially because, again, as we mentioned and talked about in our report, and as many of you know, the carbon market is shifting towards different and stronger definitions of quality and integrity. And Core Carbon Principles program is an example of that. So we wanted to dig into this a little bit more and understand how this development is impacting the market. EM specifically is very uniquely positioned to help our audience and the market better understand what's going on at this point in time, given our extensive network of supply side actors who are the first ones navigating the impacts and developments of this program. We really want this webinar to be educational and share information about what's going on, particularly to provide a space for practitioners to talk about and better understand the early experiences of developers who are navigating this, best practices, challenges, opportunities. So I'm really excited for a really robust conversation about this. So with that, we have a really exciting, great panel of experts and practitioners. My colleague, Alex Procton at Ecosystem Marketplace, will start. I forgot to mention, in addition to wanting to host this webinar, Ecosystem Marketplace did a follow-up survey after our publication of the report to dig in on some of these topics. So we surveyed the supply side of the market, had 75 responses, which Alex will touch on, to better understand what's happening, who's planning to transition or develop new projects, what those challenges, best practices, and sort of demand trends they're seeing. So with that, Alex will start and share a little bit more of that data with you. Then we have Matthew Ashpole from TreeAid speaking, then Joe Anderson at Carbon Tanzania, and we'll conclude with Thomas Giambra from the Forestry Commission of Ghana. So with that, I will pass it to Alex. Oh, and sorry, just quickly, I want to go through the agenda and what to expect a little bit more for this webinar. And again, we'll have the question and answer session at the end. But really, Alex will touch on the status of the Core Carbon Principles program, those findings from the survey that we did, and then we'll get insights from our practitioners that I just mentioned, Matthew, Joe, and Thomas. And then again, we'll conclude with a robust conversation and questions from the audience. So with that, I will pass it to Alex. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Just a quick reminder, we will be recording this and posting the slides at the end as well. So all of this information will be accessible and available to you and any of your colleagues, as you want to access it and need it. So with that, I'll pass it to Alex. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charlotte. So as Charlotte mentioned, one of the major themes that we explored in our 2025 State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report was the ongoing evolution of the voluntary carbon market with respect to quality and integrity. And one of the most important initiatives around quality and integrity has been the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market's Core Carbon Principles program, which was established in 2023, and in 2024 began to approve individual project methodologies for those credits to be accepted under the core carbon principles. So this is a really innovative program because when a standard is approved for the program and a methodology within that standard is approved, credits that fall under those criteria are automatically considered to be part of the core carbon principles. This is meant to be easy to understand and bring this dimension of integrity to the broader carbon market. As of right now, there have been 8 project categories that have been approved. The first 3, landfill gas, ozone depleting substance destructive, and fugitive emissions, representing the credits that were available in 2024. Then there's been the REDD+ and afforestation, reforestation, revegetation categories, which will be the focus of this webinar on nature-based solutions. And then earlier this year, the cook stoves and biodigesters categories were approved, as well as nitric acid abatement from adipic acid production, which is an industrial process category. Even since the publication of our report in May, ICBCM has been adding new methodologies at the start of their assessment process, including additional afforestation, reforestation methodologies, waste disposal and methane abatement, and carbon dioxide removal methodologies like direct air capture, biomass burial, and sequestration. We're also still awaiting final results from assessments that have already been initiated on improved forest management, sustainable agriculture, and biochar methodologies. So within core carbon principles, there's 2 types of nature-based solutions that have been approved and several different methodologies within these 2 types. So the first is REDD+. This is reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. And there's been 1 project-based methodology approved and 2 jurisdictional REDD+ methodologies that have been approved. Those jurisdictional methodologies being the Art Trees methodology for non-high forest, low deforestation, and the Vera's the jurisdictional nested REDD framework. For project-based REDD+, the VM48 methodology from Vera has been approved. However, projects have not transitioned over or been established under this methodology yet, because data that's key for this has to be provided by Vera. And we'll have Carbon Tanzania speaking directly to this experience later in the webinar. This is the largest project type within the voluntary carbon market. Over the last 3 years, volumes have declined among overall questions about quality and integrity within the VCM and specific scrutiny of some REDD+ projects, but this is still the largest and most liquid project type when looking at all REDD+ credits. The second type of nature-based solution that has been approved has been afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, or ARR. So there's 2 methodologies that have been approved. In December last year, the VM47 methodology has been approved, and in July, just this month, the ACR, afforestation and reforestation of degraded lands methodology, was approved. And we'll have TRIAID, who has the first project approved under VM47 speaking. There's also 1 project under the ACR standard that has already issued credits for afforestation, reforestation under core carbon principles. This is a category that's shown extremely strong demand over the last year. We saw overall that removal credits, of which afforestation, reforestation are the most prevalent type of credits on the market at the moment. Folks who are searching for credits that represent removals of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that's driving up the price of these by 19% over the last year, even though the actual transaction volume is decreasing. So we see that as just huge demand for every ton of afforestation, reforestation credit that's available on the market, to the point that there is no longer a surplus of these credits available. And so to understand more about this, we conducted a follow-up survey of respondents, and we got 75 responses, which is about the same as what we usually get on our qualitative sentiment survey for the state of BCM. So really pleased with how robust these results have been. Our respondents generally represent the sell side of the market, mostly project developers, brokers, and other intermediaries. We also had some respondents representing credit standards, market researchers, or multilateral organizations. And the bias in our data is towards nature-based solutions. That is in line with our historic position in the market and good contact with forestry and land use project developers, as well as agriculture project developers. We also heard from 24% of respondents that they develop or transact renewable energy credits. That's also not surprising, as that's the second largest category within the BCM. So we asked a bunch of questions, and the first one that we wanted to understand before diving into core carbon principles was what were the biggest bottlenecks for developing and actually selling these credits. Respondents still say that the biggest issue that they're having is a lack of clarity around the ultimate offsetting of emissions using credits, whether that's in a voluntary or compliance context. And so the Core Carbon Principles program could help to provide some clarity by providing a definition of quality and integrity for these credits, although I don't think that this will be sufficient, as buyers will also need guidance on how to buy and retire credits in a manner that is still driving decarbonization within their business. Another bottleneck that stood out was delayed project validation, and that can be related to the standard's ongoing efforts to introduce new methodologies, including ones that are eligible for the core principles. We also asked respondents about the most important factors that they perceive buyers being interested in when they select credits to purchase. And overwhelmingly, we see that it's project-specific attributes, especially project type, but also project geography, project vintage. Then sort of a second tier that we see in terms of what's important is this interoperability and this quality and integrity dimensions, whether that is defined by the credit ratings from these third-party rating agencies that have been established recently, the eligibility for credits in the compliance market, or something that's growing is the importance of core carbon principles approval. We were able to get perspective from our respondents on their intentions to transition existing projects or establish new projects under core carbon principles methodologies. So we had 29 respondents who are considering transitioning their existing project, and 18 who are not sure whether they would transition a project. This is an even mix for project transitions between REDD+ and ARR developers. And overall, the respondents who are considering transitioning have an overwhelmingly positive view of the core principles. Something that I want to point out is that this column for not applicable, these are respondents who have projects that don't fall under any of the categories that have been approved for core carbon principles. They still, in the majority, have a positive view of the CCP program. So this is something that overall we saw that the carbon market views as positive, bringing a floor to quality and integrity. And we had similar results from the respondents who intend to register a new project. This was skewed more towards afforestation and reforestation, but 29 respondents said that they were considering establishing a new project, whereas 15 were unsure. And again, we had positive views both in the respondents who do intend to establish a new project and the ones who don't have projects that this applies to. So overall, 63% of our respondents tended to have a positive view of the impact of the Core Carbon Principles program. We had an equal number of respondents considering transitioning to new CCP-approved methodologies for an existing project, and an equal number considering establishing a new project. But looking beyond the quantitative answers to some of their more unstructured qualitative responses, many respondents stated that the current pace of approvals within the core carbon principles doesn't meet the expectations of the larger VCM. Whether this is because the larger VCM just expects that all project types will be evaluated and assessments will be evaluated right away, or whether that's specific to the project type that they develop within. I think that there's a lot of messaging that can still be done about the early phase of implementation of the core carbon principles program. And as we highlighted, most existing methodologies have not yet been evaluated. So the respondents who develop those specific project types or specific methodologies under those different standards, they're not sure what impact core carbon principles will have on their business. Other respondents indicated that there are other indicators of product quality, such as the specific community benefits, other programs that have been established to document social and environmental benefits. And so for them, core carbon principles is not yet a priority. So we've been seeing a high level of interest in the core carbon principles program and core carbon principles labeled credits, but we're still seeing that there's a lack of clarity on the scope of the program in this initial phase. The methodologies that have been approved for nature-based solutions that I highlighted earlier in this presentation, they have a relatively low volume of credits that are available, but ICVCM is still adding more methodologies and evaluating more programs for eligibility. So we saw that with the recent addition of the ACR afforestation standard over the last month. One key consideration that we see is that ARR projects are already in really high demand as a source of removal credits. And so it's hard to say with the increased prevalence of forward offtake agreements for these projects, how exactly that's going to affect the supply of CCP eligible credits. And finally, we're still looking to see these integrity assessments of other nature-based solutions, including improved forest management, sustainable agriculture. Once we do see more assessments, there's two pathways that we see for this to affect credit price. One is increased demand. So we saw it in the last year with landfill gas that prices increased by 35%, despite no underlying change in the supply of credits. That's just for the credits that were approved for the CCP program. With these nature-based solutions, we could actually have a change in the carbon accounting when they transmit. Or when they transition to a new methodology. And so that could actually decrease the supply of credits that's available in these project types. And that could further push up the price of these credits. So really excited to turn over now to our speakers, and we'll return for a Q&A at the end with all of the speakers together. Now I'll turn it over to Matthew Ashpole from TreeAid, who will speak about their reforestation project and their journey to embrace carbon credits.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you very much.
Just quickly, Matthew, before you go, thanks for all of that. I think it's just important to highlight that there's been a lot of attention and anticipation around core carbon principles, and this is a really meaningful development for the market in terms of de-risking buyer decisions and really creating a framework to understand quality and integrity for projects. However, the market does need to shift and respond to that. So I think the data that we've been able to collect is really important in helping us to understand not only what the perception is, but some of these initial activities that are taking place and plans from the supply side of the market to respond to these new developments that hopefully help the market grow and mature in the coming years. So with that, I will pass it on to Matthew. We're really excited to hear about the work you're doing at TreeAid, specifically around your afforestation reforestation project. So Matthew, I'll pass it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Ashpole, Nature-Based Solutions and Carbon Manager at TreeAid. I lead carbon quantification at our organization and wider project design and certification processes as well. So I'm here to give you all a bit of perspective from Triade on how we have navigated the push for higher integrity in the market, the challenges that we've faced, and the opportunities that we see going forward. Next slide, please. So Triade is a primarily development-focused organization linking the impacts of climate change with the ongoing humanitarian crises of poverty and hunger across the dry lands of Africa. We started in 1987 with our head office in Bristol, England, and our regional HQ is now in Burkina Faso, with other country offices in Mali, Niger, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Senegal. We've planted roughly 32 million trees to date, restored nearly 240,000 hectares, and supported nearly 4 million people directly. Our long-standing focal areas have been forest restoration, agroforestry, and economic development of enterprises through non-timber forest products. And we work through 3 core layers of society to enact change, empowering individual families through things like green jobs and cook stoves, empowering communities as a whole through village savings and loans associations, and empowering systems by focusing on creating an enabling environment for forest protection and restoration through formalized land tenure systems. Next slide, please. So right up until roughly 2021, our restoration model was exclusively through grant-based financing. During this time, we refined and perfected a forest governance style approach, which is relatively synonymous with participatory forest management, if you're more familiar with that term. This approach identifies degraded forest sites, establishes a management plan and bylaws, and works with the community to officially recognize their rights to manage the forest, and provides them with the tools and reignites the knowledge required to restore those resources. If you'd like to know more about Triade's forest governance approach, I would direct you to our forest governance paper, authored by my colleagues Annie Schultz, Jasmine Dorney, and Alexis Somputu. Since we brought carbon finance on board, we've since framed opportunities with a restoration first logic. Which financing vehicle is the most appropriate for the scale of restoration required? So that's carbon versus grant based. Would this be additional given the work already completed? And what systems do we need to put in place for the project to thrive? Tontenga is our best example of it. The project title translates to Our Land in Moray, which is Burkina Faso's indigenous language. And this was built on our larger forest governance project running since 2007. Thanks to the systems put into place by that forest governance approach, we were able to work with Earthshot Labs to get this project to be the first ever registered under VM47, which is a massive achievement for us. And we are very proud to have set that standard for quality under this methodology. And in what many see as a bit of an underdog of a geography, not receiving the same climate finance investment as other African countries. We also have our Olympic Forest projects, which is a cross-border project under Plan Vivo 5, covering Mali and Senegal. It's much smaller scale, and we hope to increase that in the next few years. We recently received pilot funding to kick off our sister project to Tontenga, called TC Tenga, which means the land of trees in Mampruli, spanning a few localities in northern Ghana and focusing on restoring forest resources in the White Volta River Basin. Between them, they have about 4 million trees planted to date and expect roughly 7 million tons of CO2 to be issued over 40 years. Next slide, please. So now we're coming on to the core topic that's relevant to this webinar, how we, as a community-based development actor, navigated the core carbon principles and the VM47 methodology specifically. Governance first. Clearly, this term comes second nature to us based on our forest governance approach. And we really value the ICVCM's sub-principle goals of tracking, transparency, and robust validation and verification. But these did cause some sticking points for us in terms of the volume of work required to prove these elements of the methodology, forcing people like Alexi, our project coordinator for Tontenga, to spend all day overseeing tree planting, then uploading data from the field when he gets back to the office, and also properly digesting and understanding the PDD and questions from the auditor to ensure that we were getting the correct local context. As far as emissions impacts, we are completely aligned with. Demonstrating high integrity, additionality, permanence, and robust quantification are expectations that all VCM actors should expect to conduct. However, one observation that sticks out regarding permanence is the challenge of satisfying that 100-year permanence goal with a community-based project, wherein a contract of participation, in whatever format that is, needs to cover sometimes 2 generations worth of chiefs or more, which is one point that we definitely have struggled with during our project development. Sustainable developments, I think, is where we thrive in terms of our project design being centered around community benefits and long-term stewardship. Our projects have a core goal of poverty alleviation as a key performance indicator, and our projects always aim for an equitable benefit sharing mechanism achieved through free, prior, and informed consent. This relates, however, to one thing I'll come on to soon, which is balancing this with feasibility inside the market conditions that are present. We all have access to the knowledge for best practice, but this doesn't always align with financing available to us, even in the voluntary carbon market. Next slide, please. So as a principal slide for my presentation, what does TREADE see as its main opportunities and challenges in the VCM? And what can we, standards, and the market do as a whole to support community-based developers? Starting with the barriers, we found that pilot funding to establish a project, even if you already have nearly 2 decades of historical activity in the sites and a strong framework, can still leave you stretched to satisfy the community engagement, registration fees, organizational manpower required, and also get the project implemented while preparing for audit and registration. During that process, the methodologies do ask a completely different suite of skills to what non-carbon development actors likely have on staff to cover things like the performance benchmarking, ex-ante modeling, and the skills that you likely do have on hand to cover field campaigns in this project type. You have to conduct nearly exponentially more of it. So this can put pressures on the team that you may not have been aware of beforehand. Broadly now, we have very extensive due diligences from, I think, every step of the project design and implementation, which is a shift in what we experienced when establishing Tontenga in 2023. And financial models, when discussing with investors, are not necessarily shifting with the demands. When acquiring either seed funding or pre-purchase agreements with the funds being used to run the project, we haven't felt that CCP boost come through just yet. Though it is early days, I think we could do with more movement towards more modest IRRs in the interest of higher quality project delivery. So onto opportunities. We would like to see more projects be given that opportunity to pilot their project in a meaningful way with fully costed and healthy seed funding, which allows you to de-risk the project for the bigger actors to seek offtake deals, further de-risking the project for everyone involved. We would like to see simplified options in MRV and generally text solutions for things like dynamic baselining, ex-ante modeling, to increase accessibility in the market under high quality standards, thinking of solutions like the jurisdictional mapping approach that VM48 has undertaken, but with a more agile and global rollout. Lastly, we want to see investors and buyers turn their attention to the underdogs of the market and support projects in the Great Green Wall, which, as you can see from our paper co-authored by myself, Rebecca Lauriciano, and the World Economic Forum, has been demonstrated to have massive untapped potential. So I would like to conclude just to discuss quickly what's next for TREADE in the VCM. We want to scale up our own work through a multi-country portfolio. We want more projects that strengthen land tenure and forest governance with equitable benefit sharing, more transparency, and we want to offer non-profit technical support to small and medium-sized organizations who wish to break into the carbon market, but do not have the funds or are uneconomical to be supported by the larger technical consultancies, supporting real grassroots community-led projects to become the norm in the VCM. Thank you very much for your time, and any questions at the end?
Thanks so much, Matthew. I think you really helped illustrate just how resource intensive and all of the considerations and work that goes into developing a project anyway, but especially with the added rigor of the methodologies with CCP approval. So with that, thank you so much. We look forward to asking you some questions at the end. But for now, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Joe Anderson at Carbon Tanzania. So with that, Joe, I will pass it to you. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, thanks, Matthew. You've laid the groundwork very well for me to hopefully talk about the other main methodology that has been identified by Alex. Carbon Tanzania, if you don't know us, I'm the co-founder and I look after the finance and sales for the company. But we started as a very small conservation effort in Tanzania over 15 years ago, and essentially set the business up to deal with this wicked problem of finding a way to fund local communities and compensate them for their actions to protect forests. We are focused on REDD, as I said, so I'm going to talk today about the challenges and opportunities, hopefully, of developing REDD projects mostly, and also transitioning REDD projects so that the credits that they issue are eligible for CCP approval. We have 3 verified projects under certification at the moment. One is certified by the Plan Vivo Foundation, and 2 are certified under Verar's VM7 methodology. We are then also developing a further project from scratch, which will eventually issue credits under the VM48 methodology. So what we're talking about today, and what I'll hopefully be giving some insights on, are the challenges and opportunities of both developing the one project, at least that we're focused on, and transitioning 2 others. Next slide, please. I mean, a lot of us hopefully know, some of you might already know, we have a lot of challenges to both develop and transition these projects to these new methodologies, specifically in our case to VM48. The responsibilities of Carbon Tanzania as a project developer here require us to plan for these new methodologies, think about the requirements of the new methodology, and to analyze all sorts of things from the carbon accounting areas that are going to be used, thinking about potentially enhanced biomass measurements, and looking at the options for what we need to do in terms of both the technical and the activity-based interventions that we need to fulfill the requirements of these new methodologies. And it all requires us to essentially revalidate the entire project, so not a insignificant undertaking for anyone who knows what it's like to develop carbon projects. This almost certainly, again, as we already know, will lead to haircuts in the number of credits that will probably be issued from even the same project areas, based on new baselining modeling that we're going to have to do. So there's a lot to go into there. I can't obviously go through every single technical detail. So we're going to move on to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit and focus very much on the practical issues of either developing or transitioning. And for us, the focus, as Matthew actually alluded to, is really understanding the role of our communities and making sure that everything we put in place is aligned with their priorities and their socioeconomic livelihood needs. It's called FPIC. This is the term that's thrown around. What does it really mean? Well, it's a very sort of specific process which has to be tailored to the context in which you're working, and the reality is it's ongoing. The transitioning, in our case, 2 projects, or developing new one, just emphasizes how important it is to continue to be engaged with communities. For us, this means ensuring that financial flows will be consistent. It means that we need to make communities aware that this transition is happening without obviously introducing incredibly complex concepts, but being open and transparent that there is a change happening. And then beyond that, FPIC, in a sense, can be seen as going even higher to higher levels of government, where people need to be made aware that there could be changes, finances may change, issuances are going to change. And to that end, we've worked very hard with our government partners and various strategic partners in the space to help them understand what's coming. governments have to, for these jurisdictional programs, commission organizations to generate jurisdictional data. Data service providers are contracted, and they're producing what we call risk maps, which help us to develop the baselines for this new methodology. Again, this is all speaking to the jurisdictional accounting of carbon, which is seen by the market as a much more a higher integrity way of making climate claims. And working with the government is very important because they need to be brought into the process and pretty much own the results of that if it's going to be meaningful and applicable to our work. So yeah, the point here, FPIC at every level, it never stops. Next slide, please. So what activities, does it involve practically? Again, huge amounts of things we could talk about, but what we do need to think about to account for some of the haircuts that we might expect in issuance, to account for some of the perturbation, let's call it, at the project level, we might want to expand our carbon accounting areas on the ground. That again requires consultations with the villages, our communities, whoever's involved. These new methodologies can include post-deforestation plots, which weren't in VM7. And we could be adding ARR instances even in the same landscape. That would be a great way of balancing out some of the potential loss in issuance and therefore revenues. Combined with that, we're very focused on doing, again, part of the FPIC, I suppose you'd call it, but much more specific. To make these decisions, we need to have focused learning events with community groups and the local government. We've been doing this in both of our sites at the moment, and we hope that will lay the groundwork for a successful transition. Last slide, please. Big question, which was alluded to already by Matthew, is the cost of this. Who's going to bear the cost? It's not cheap. Will the costs fall on the communities? We don't think that's really fair. Should project developers be expected to bear the cost? These are difficult questions to answer. So the availability of capital and the terms of that, which we often ask in these situations, how are we going to access that, and what will be available to help that transition? And of course, related to that, we all know that having a very clear signal from the market that the credits that will be produced and potentially issued under these new methodologies will have a much higher attractive price point for the market. If we get that clear indication, then of course perhaps getting capital to pay for all this transition work would be easier. So that's kind of a big question mark for me at the end. So I think I'll stop there, and obviously we'll be waiting for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. I think we really appreciate your explanation and how much detail you go into in terms of the relationship management and investment and work that you do with communities to work closely with them, make sure those benefit sharing mechanisms are in place and really benefiting them, and what the implications are of having worked with them for many years when you were developing your project initially, and now with this transitioning existing projects or new ones, really updating the understanding and the work you do with them, and trying to navigate how that these costs that you have to bear the brunt of, where those land. I think it's a really important thing to understand and keep in mind as we're trying to navigate the development of these projects and costs associated when it may take some time to see the carbon finance truly. So thank you for that. With that, we'll get to our last speaker. We will hear from Thomas Yambra. Thomas, please go ahead. Thank you so much. You're muted, Thomas. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Charlotte. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that. And thanks to my co-panelists here, Matthew and Joe, putting the perspective from the private sector here. I'm coming from the government sector. And just to start off by thanking you for the invitation to contribute to this timely conversation on the core carbon principles, their influence on the voluntary carbon market. And Ghana specifically welcomes the shifts towards high integrity, transparent, scalability in climate finance. Very much pleased to share insights from our experience with jurisdictional red flags, which continues to evolve with clear focus on environmental rigor and social inclusion. I'll start off by sharing Ghana's red flags journey over the years. Ghana began its red flags journey with subnational pilots under the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, which culminated in the successful delivery of resource-based payments. Our commitment to inclusive development is reflected in our benefit sharing model, where 69% of carbon revenues are distributed to forest communities. Joe mentioned, for instance, the communities are key to whatever is done. In Ghana, we have 69% of the carbon revenues going to communities. That's empowering local actors and reinforcing climate justice. But today, we believe that our transition to the architecture for red flags transactions, that's the ATRIs, marks a decisive move towards high integrity jurisdictional crediting. Ghana's trees concepts, approval, and robust monitoring, reporting, and verification systems affirm our readiness to participate in a market that values credibility, and we are on track to becoming the first African nation to be issued with the first trees credits. We believe that with CCP approval, that leads to raising the market for market credibility. The introduction of CCPs, we believe, has shifted market dynamics by sharpening the focus on the integrity and environmental soundness. While this may reduce the supply of eligible credits, that's temporarily because of we realize from the presentation of Alex, it creates a distinct opportunity for jurisdictions like Ghana, whose programs already meet many of the stringent criteria. Our alignment, especially with the ATRIs, position us to generate CCP compliant credits, attracting buyers that demand high quality and impact credit. I would, as done by the earlier speakers, I would kind of come up with Ghana's opportunities in CCP-aligned carbon markets. Here I have 5 of them. The market differentiation. Here, we believe that Ghana's jurisdictional programs stand apart from fragmented project-level approaches by offering national scale credibility that is anchored in policy adherence and MRV transparency. As I would usually put it, the indirect causes of deforestation and forest degradation, that's what we are trying to fight here, that's leading to climate change, spans across multiple sectors. That's from jurisdictional perspective, you can now be able to achieve policy coherence. Again, we believe that CCP compliant credits present premium products which appeals to buyers seeking integrity and durability. 2, we are looking at policy coherence and adherence here. Policy coherence and adherence. Our red flag strategy integrates seamlessly with national climate and land use policies, ensuring that carbon finance supports development projects with the sustainable development in mind. And we believe that jurisdictional implementation mitigates risks of land use conflicts and strengthens institutional governance for long-term success. The third point I would like to make about Ghana's opportunity in the CCP-aligned carbon market is private sector engagement. Companies, which I see most companies here, are increasingly aligned with science-based targets and ESG standards. Ghana's CCP-ready credit signal reliability and social responsibility, positioning us to attract private investment and corporate offsets demand. This also creates space for local enterprises and cooperatives to thrive within the sustainable supply chain, especially in cocoa, with the EUDR, for instance, coming in as soon as possible. The fourth point here I would like to make is scalability, nesting, and regional leadership with systems already in place in Ghana. We are poised to scale REDD+ to other ecological zones. Currently, we have it in the high forest zone of Ghana. We are poised to scale it up to the mangroves and the savannas, while sharing best practices across Africa as well. The last point for me is key, and that was alluded to by Joe in his presentation. That's enhanced co-benefits and SDG integration. Ghana's REDD+ programs deliver far-reaching co-benefits, including biodiversity conservation, gender empowerment, climate-smart agriculture, and livelihood diversification. These contributions support the sustainable development goals and elevate the value of our carbon assets. But one key enabler in all of this has been the ability to understand the language of all stakeholders. It's like the analogy of a 6 and a 9, depending on where one stands. One will say it's a 6, the other will say it's a 9. You see, we have lots of stakeholders with different approaches and objectives, but when it comes to jurisdictional approach and who would want to work towards a common goal, you're able to, it takes a longer time to understand and appreciate them. But once people begin to understand and there's a common goal and language, you realize that people begin to come together. And that has been the case of Ghana. We started the REDD+ process in 2008, but it took a longer time putting in terms these frameworks, bringing all of these stakeholders together before we were able to achieve the carbon payments. One other key hurdle or challenge that I believe practically we want to mention here today is that all of these take a lot of time. Let me use the arteries as an example, which we are currently doing validation and verification for. The standard is so strong, not only on the what has been produced, that's not only on the carbon credits, but it's on the how the carbon credit has been produced. Joe mentioned, for instance, ethic. What are the indicators for engaging the community? Did you ensure free, prior, informed consent? How did you go about it? So such rigorousness takes a lot of time to prove, and that's a header that I believe I need to mention here today. How you've engaged the communities, basically validating and verifying the safeguards measures that have been put in place. I would want to end on this note that Ghana's jurisdictional REDD+ experience illustrates integrity, inclusivity, and national ownership that can coexist and thrive within the voluntary carbon market. And we believe that as CCP standards reshape the supply landscape, countries with robust systems, visionary leadership like Ghana are positioned not only to participate, but to lead in this. We are open to questions and answers to give further details and clarifications subsequently. Thank you very much. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I think it's really wonderful to hear your perspective in Ghana, and you really just highlight how important it is to have this institutional knowledge at the government level, government-led and driven in terms of jurisdictional programs, because so much of the development and future of the carbon market, the voluntary carbon market, and other international compliance markets has to really be a partnership between all of these stakeholders, particularly governments. So it's really helpful to understand how Ghana is developing your jurisdictional program and how the new developments of CCP impact that. I do think it's important to note that jurisdictional programming, the art trees, was just approved, so there isn't an existing transition that needs to be made compared to the work that Triade and Carbon Tanzania are having to do to register new projects or transition existing projects. So there is an interesting difference there in terms of how that impacts jurisdictional programming versus other project-based developers. So with that, I would like to ask all of our wonderful speakers to come back. We had so much important, robust information that we heard from that we're a little bit behind on time. So we are going to plan to go over about 3 to 5 minutes. I know it's possible that many of you won't be able to stay on past the hour. However, we are recording this. So I just want to make sure that we get time to cover a few questions. We are recording this for those who can't stay past the hour, and it will be available on Ecosystem Marketplace's website early next week for you to, rewatch the content, or at least tune back in for the last few minutes of conversation if you're not able to stay with us. So thank you so much. So with that, we have a few really interesting questions, but I think, something that you all touched on, but I think is really worth digging in a little deeper on and highlighting is, and I will ask this of each of our speakers, but how do you incorporate integrity and quality into your operations that aligns with CCPs? And this is really predating the development and introduction of the CCP program. And how is that aligned to help lead you into this sort of new phase of the voluntary carbon market? I think you all have a really unique, interesting perspective to share there. So I will just go based on my screen. And it looks like, Thomas, you are first, if you don't mind answering that.
Thank you very much for the question. Key here is to have robust methodologies in there, as well, transparent MRV systems, and 3 stakeholder inclusivity, environmental and incorporating environmental and social safeguards. So 4 key things. The first one is robust methodologies. We have the ICVCM approved methodologies, which are quite key here. So if you have robust methodologies in there, there are indicators that you have to meet, and in that score, you are able to incorporate integrity in whatever you are doing. When you have transparent MRV systems, you are able to get third party coming in to verify that as well. When you ensure stakeholder inclusivity, you're able to engage local stakeholders, especially indigenous people, local communities in the project design, the benefit sharing arrangements, and you're able to document the free, prior, and informed consent and grievance redress mechanism, and environmental and social integrity. You're able to align with the country approach to safeguards, the Cancun safeguards. Once you have your principles, criteria, and indicators developed for your safeguards, your environmental and social safeguards, all of these demonstrate how you can incorporate integrity in whatever you are doing. Also key is governance arrangements across from the national level through to the community level, and bringing everyone on board in that regard. So quickly, these are like key integrity issues and how you can incorporate them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Matthew, can you go next, please?
Yeah, so yeah, similar vein, really. I think Triade has always really been involved in community engagement to the similar level. The change has been more about the evidence that you provide for that, and also the conditions under which those discussions are occurring. You are discussing more complex topics to do with market access and what an equitable agreement is. So you have as a developer, you have a responsibility to encourage more engagement and more in-depth engagement to explain these topics, because if you reach an agreement with a community who hasn't been fully communicated to how these things work, then that's not an equitable agreement, because they haven't been free, prior, and informed. And that's the main thing for us, I think, is community engagement.
Absolutely. I think we can't underscore enough how important that is, and how much time, effort, work, collaboration it really takes to have these strong relationships, make sure that free, prior, informed consent is strong, and that you're working together. So I appreciate that. Joe, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Sean. I mean, I can add very briefly. I mean, for us, the climate finance for land-based projects of this kind is de facto development finance. That's what it should be. So we've always designed projects, and often in when we're collaborating in the same landscape with leading rights organizations who can guide us, and potentially protect or at least facilitate a conversation with communities. So you end up designing a project that goes way beyond the basic requirements of certification, because you're designing it to have development outcomes from the beginning. Now, when we look at the new requirements in something like VM 48, they're not so difficult to meet. I think, that's the point. Not much will change. There may be some technical requirements, and I think recording what we do better or in potentially different forms may be the change that is required. But overall, if you're treating this entire enterprise as a development mechanism, you should be fulfilling those requirements pretty naturally, as a matter of course. So I think, echoing Matthew's point there, it potentially we have to get better at recording that or framing it, but essentially that should be happening in any case, in these type of projects.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's really important to just highlight and underscore. Sort of related to some of what you've all touched on when you were speaking earlier, but I think it's very clear that there's a challenge with particularly early stage capital and carbon finance investment. And I think both Matthew and Joe at TreeAid and Carbon Tanzania respectively, and then interestingly from the government perspective as well, what are sort of the challenges that you're seeing or opportunities you'd like to see more of regarding that earlier stage investment, given that there's so much resources that you all are putting towards these new developments in the market? With that, I wanted to add on, do you see, and again, we're in the early stages, so I'm going to sort of make a two-parter here, but do you see CCP impacting that? And additionally, if you can touch on your time horizons that you're looking at, because I think that's part of it in terms of, I see some questions in the chat about, when do you expect to register and issue your credits? And so, that is very much tied to when you start to see revenue generated from the development of these projects, but also how does that impact, the earlier stages of development? So sorry, there's a lot sort of tied up in that question. So please touch on what you think is most relevant. But maybe I'll start with you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. So for key challenges in the early stage development, as you alluded in your question, I think one key is a high upfront costs. You have to do baseline studies, stakeholder consultations, MRV design requirements, substantial investment before credits are issued, sometimes methodological uncertainty. Developers may struggle to align with evolving CCP compliant methodologies. You may not even be sure about that. Regulatory ambiguities, some of these may come in, but how CCPs may impact these challenges. One, looking at stricter integrity requirements, CCPs demand robust baseline conservative accounting and transparent MRV, incentivizing quality over speed. So projects must prioritize long-term credibility, which can slow initial rollout, but improve market access at a later time. For instance, when Alex did his presentation, he said that there are so many methodologies, but not most of these methodologies have now been approved. It takes a longer time for some of these to come on board. Then access to, say, premium markets, CCP tax credits are more likely to attract buyers seeking high integrity, offset making early compliance worthwhile in the long run. So even though you could have high upfront costs, in the long run, this can be offset with access to premium markets in the long term. So balancing this out helps out.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Joe, will you go next, please?
Thanks. Yeah. Gosh, yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? I think the issue, of course, is a very practical issue of when we can actually transition or even develop a new project based on data availability. In our particular case of RED, we are dependent on data being, and I kind of alluded to this, we're dependent on data being provided by Verar. That has to be contracted, and the host government has to approve it and essentially own the process. So we can definitely cooperate with partners, but we aren't, we're not in a position to affect that, and nor should we be. So timeline wise, that means we're simply waiting, and our activities are contingent on that, and therefore, everything that goes with that, i.e. getting the money that's required and promising potential buyers who might be willing to fund a transition, it depends on that. So, this time contingency does present, significant challenges for us, and that really ripples down to both the very local level in terms of setting expectations, and also even our government partners, who also have an important part to play in project development and implementation. What to say about that? I mean, if it's going, again, if the market is giving very clear signals that this is the direction they want to take, and that by implementing this in a rigorous and comprehensive fashion is going to deliver high prices, then I would feel confident to go to the potential sources of revenue to bridge these gaps in timing, to provide the interim capital. So it really is massively dependent on understanding what the market is going to pay for these credits, and getting a very strong and as reliable as possible signal that that is going to be the case, like in so many businesses. So it really is this entire rather complicated set of contingencies that we're dealing with as developers.
Thanks so much, Joe. That's really helpful. And Matthew, anything to add?
Yeah, just a little bit to echo. I completely agree with Joe, what you said at the end there, in terms of, we all know that through these CCPs and through these methodologies, what we're doing has such a high integrity that it will justify a higher price in the market. But when you speak to investors and when you have engagements with them and you look at financial models, it can still be hard to sell that and to say, okay, so in that case, we need to receive more money to do it properly in the first instance. So, we do hear, and a lot of people are talking about blended finance in these cases, and sometimes that can help you bridge that gap for project establishment in particular, in order to lay the groundwork properly, that you have more confidence in yourself, and when you're speaking to these investors, to say, really, we are going to deliver this, and you can see why. But it's bridging that gap, like Joe said, about getting the project off the ground and laying that good groundwork.
Thank you so much. Yeah, often in our work at Ecosystem Marketplace, we talk so much about the complexity of just the life cycle of a carbon credit, right? From development, registration, issuance, transactions, which it can change many hands, to the ultimate, goal of retirement. And that can take years, and does take years, really, right? So, really underscoring that fact is, something I think we often overlook a bit in terms of just the complexity and the time horizons of this work for it to be, truly impactful. So thank you so much for those answers. I'm gonna ask two more quick questions. And Alex, I just wanted to touch on something with you. We actually mentioned this a bit in our recent State of the Voluntary Carbon Market report, but there's ICVCM has come in as a third party to provide a framework that helps buyers particularly, but also developers, sort of navigate definitions and frameworks around quality and integrity. However, there are also inherent project attributes that we talked about in our report, in terms of credit recency, removals, things like that are just inherent in a credit and a project itself. Can you talk a little bit more about other efforts and standards in particular who are trying to really enhance understanding and definitions of quality, or making improvements to their own program, whatever that may look like? Please just touch on it for maybe 1 to 2 minutes so that we can get one last question in.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, it's going to be hard to fit this into a short response. But I mean, absolutely, I think, and we developed this work out of the research that we had done for the state of the voluntary carbon market. We were obviously like not affiliated with ICVCM or with any of these standards. And so this is something that we do because we see that this is influential in the market and we want to understand the impact. But as I mentioned really early on in the presentation, it is one of many complementary efforts to enhance integrity across the market. It's really focused on like creating a minimal definition of quality for the sell side. Doesn't really speak to the buy side of the market, what buyers are doing to decarbonize ahead of purchasing offsets. So that's something that's been tackled by, for example, the Voluntary Carbon Market's Integrity Initiative, VCMI, another acronym with a lot of the same letters. And then individual standards might have their own initiatives. So for example, like pioneering digital MRV, pushing for more benefit sharing and building that into the definition of the standard from the start. So like these are all things that are separate and totally complementary to what ICVCM is doing, as well as things like third parties that offer quality ratings for individual projects. Like that is something that's totally complementary. And I think like really by looking at all of these dimensions, this is what's now giving buyers more confidence that they're actually purchasing quality credits with high integrity that fit their values.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. And I see we still have quite a few people on the webinar. So I'm going to ask one last question that I think is really important and critical in terms of our understanding going forward. And then we'll wrap up. But there's so much interesting and important information to discuss and dig in on. And I hope that we have opportunities to continue this conversation in the future. But with that, just a last question I saw is someone wrote, it seems that CCP-aligned credits are primarily developed to meet international standards for integrity and market access. For countries that are designing domestic carbon standards for forest carbon, what lessons can we take from the CCP process? How can domestic programs incorporate or align with CCP requirements to ensure both credibility and competitiveness in international markets? And I think this is someone who's coming from the perspective of developing domestic carbon programs in Vietnam. So I'd love to pass that to you first, Thomas, of in terms of the governmental management of carbon policy and engaging in different mechanisms. Obviously Article 6 is really, starting to take off. There's CORSIA in a new phase. And so what does this look like, or what lessons can be learned and taken away for government officials and actors trying to help develop and advance their national level policy and programming? And Joe and Matthew at the end, if you have anything to add, I would welcome that as well. But I'll start with you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I believe at the heart of CCP, it's the principles of transparency, governance, sustainability, sustainable development, high integrity, and even looking at the Article 6, the global framework, it talks about doing everything in towards sustainable development and high integrity. And CCP is trying to operationalize that global framework or understanding. And I think as nationals, these are key principles that nations can transition into their local or national carbon crediting systems. And once they do that, whatever they develop at the end of the day would meet this global goal of ensuring sustainable development and high integrity in that. So regardless of it being a national approach, these hallmarks should be something that should be the objective or the goal of the national carbon crediting system: high integrity, sustainable development, and these are goals the CCP are trying to push. So just to tell the questioner that regardless of what the principles they're in are the key things that should be adopted in there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Joe or Matthew, do you have anything you want to add there? Okay, great. Well, I think we'll leave that. That's a great note, and I think really just rounds out some of these really core elements of what CCP approved methodologies are trying to drive forward in this new sort of era and transition, calibration of the voluntary carbon market, as well as its interoperability with international compliance markets in order to really drive this market forward and get the investment that's so desperately needed in order to really have impact on the ground. And so again, thank you everyone so much for your time. You know, I just think these conversations are so important to have, to share experiences, best practices. You know, we are early in the rollout of CCP and other developments happening in the carbon market. And so as much as we can create robust conversations where we share that information, people have access to resources and you know, we can create a community of practitioners who are working so hard, often behind the scenes and really on the ground working. You know, you all talked so much about working with communities, which is so critical to this work. You know, I hope that we can just continue to have these conversations, expand on them, and really support each other in this journey, which is so important to, you know, all of the mission and impact-driven work that we're so passionate about. So with that, thank you to our wonderful speakers, Matthew, Thomas, and Joe. We really appreciate your time. To our audience, thank you everyone for joining. Alex as well, thanks. It's great to have you share your expertise. Sorry we're over, but I think there's just so much to talk about here that I wish we had another hour of everyone's time. That said, we will post the recording of this, the full 75 minutes that we did talk, with slides as well. And please reach out to us at info@ecosystemmarketplace.com if you have any questions or follow-up, and we'll do our best to connect you with those resources. So thanks again, everyone. Please have a wonderful rest of your day. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.